All right, so next is Darrel Ray. Darrel Ray is the founder and president of the board of directors of the international nonprofit organization Recovering from Religion. He has a BA in sociology, an MA in religion, and an Ed.D. in counseling psychology from Peabody College of Vanderbilt University. He is the author of Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality, and The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. He also is the principal director for the 2012 Sex and Secularism Report, which will soon be updated for 2019. He also started the Secular Sexuality podcast in 2014, which is now part of the Atheist Community of Austin podcast group. Please welcome Darrel Ray.
Thanks, Gwen. Good to be back here. I've been here a couple times, actually about 3 times. I love Madison. But thanks for coming tonight, and thanks to the SSA group here for inviting me. So I've got unpaid political announcements. She kind of already helped me a little bit. Thanks, Gwen. But if you don't know about Recovering from Religion, come back and visit us at the desk to find out about all the services we offer. And everything we do is voluntary and for free. And I mean, nobody gets paid. So we work with people from Pakistan to Canada, and all over the United States, of course, too, helping people deal with the consequences of leaving religion. We have a hotline, we have a chat line, people can chat in, people can call us. We try to give any kind of support we can, as much as we can over a phone or a chat line. And of course, we have something we call the Secular Therapy Project. How many of you have heard of the Secular Therapy Project? Oh, not many of you. Okay, come back and visit me, find out about that. If you are a therapist, I want to talk to you. But even if you're not a therapist, I still want to talk to you and tell you about how to find a secular therapist, because there's a hell of a lot of Christian counselors out there that don't know what the fuck they're doing. So we have over 390 therapists in the world. We're now in 7 countries. We have almost 14,000 clients who have searched for therapists. And as Gwen said a little bit earlier, this is the podcast that I started. I'm only on it occasionally now, but Atheistic Community of Austin now runs my podcast, the Secular Sexuality Podcast. I shouldn't say it's mine because it's ours. I no longer own it, so to speak. And last but not least in the political announcements, every year at Memorial Day and every year at Labor Day, I have a big party in my house, and all you friendly atheists are invited. Freethinkers are invited. We even let Christians come occasionally, as long as they don't proselytize. So if you're interested in camping out, having a 21-hour party, come to Kansas City. We have people from as far as Washington State and Corpus Christi, Texas, and Maryland come to my parties sometimes. So it's pretty interstate kind of a party. We have a lot of fun, and it's almost all freethinkers there. So you came to here and ask the question, get the question answered, did Jesus masturbate? So let's get started trying to understand that very complicated and complex question. I want to though give some objectives. First of all, I want to show the key role of sexual shame in religious propagation. I want to talk and explore some ideas about how to challenge that shame and that guilt, and I want to give you some tools for doing that yourself. And last, we'll find out if Jesus masturbated. So, 3 things that I'm sure you know about masturbation. The first thing is that, priests and ministers don't do it. The second thing you know for a fact is my Sunday school teacher never did it. And third thing you know about masturbation is it will ruin your marriage. Am I correct? Mostly? Okay. Well then, I have a big question for you, and I want you to think carefully, very carefully, before you answer this question. Because I'm going to ask this question. I masturbate. Do you? How many of you masturbate? Oh, good. We've only got a few liars in this group. Good. All right. Why is that such a hard question to answer? If I did this at a humanist group, I mean a humanist group in Florida a few years ago, and half the group divided. Half was college students over here, and the other half was old white people on this side, basically. I asked, how many of you masturbate? All the college students said yes. Almost no heads went up over here. I'm thinking, Okay, this is a great illustration of how we're still infected with religious ideas about sex and sexuality. So, to understand the psychology behind this whole sex thing that we're going to talk about here today, and not just masturbation, we have to understand that religion creates what I call a toxic trio. The first part of this toxic trio, and you have to believe in all three of these things for it to work. The first is you have to believe in an afterlife. The second thing is you have to believe in a voyeuristic God that's watching you. You know, I'm fond of saying if you believe in Jesus and you're married, you're having a threesome with Jesus every time you have sex. Third, you have to believe that God dictates a specific kind of sexual behavior to the exclusion of all other kinds of sexual behavior, and there's consequences in the afterlife for that. So if you believe those three things, then you've got what I call the toxic trio that creates something that looks a lot like an anxiety disorder. If you look at Christian marriages, all too often, you see a hell of a lot of anxiety about their sex and their sex life. And I know people who said the best sex in my whole life is going to be the first day we get married. And they said that was the worst sex I ever had in my life, and it hadn't gotten any better. And I was a committed Christian for 20 years. We hear this all the time from our chatters and our callers that call in from recovering from religion. And I call this a death neurosis. It actually creates neuroticism around sexuality and around people's expression of their sexuality. And it comes from oftentimes an apocalyptic worldview. Man, you don't want to be masturbating when the second coming happens. You'll go straight to hell. And there are people who literally believe that is true, and a lot of people in the evangelical community. They see sex as a deadly sin. The Catholics did a great job of programming that into people so that it elevates people's fear of being punished. So how do you get in bed with your partner if you're afraid of going to hell? If you're afraid that if you have the wrong kind of sex. My mother was a great Christian. She told me, Darrel, you can have any kind of sex you want as long as you're married. God doesn't care. But later I find out that, yeah, God does kind of care. You know, cocksucking is against the rules. Other kinds of sex are against the rules. You certainly don't want any anal sex. That's against the rules. She didn't tell me that. So there were some things that kind of slip in after you get this message that it's going to be wonderful sex and all this stuff's going to be great once you get married. But the ultimate piece is fear of hell and damnation, and ultimately the ostracism and isolation that comes from opening yourself to your sexuality as a human being, just a basic biological creature. And it looks something like this. Sex is always on. Can you think of anybody that thinks about sex more than evangelical Christians and Catholics? The entire religion is based upon sex. Now, maybe not sex positive, but still sex. From the notion of a virgin birth, which is a religious notion, it's not a biological notion, you get this whole religious framework of shame around sex and sexuality. So it kind of creates an approach avoidance with people. And I want a sexual release. I'm a normal biological animal that needs sex and wants sex and will release it. And then when I get finished doing it, then I feel guilty. I had sex with my boyfriend and we're not married. So now I feel really guilty. What do I have to do? Well, I have to go back to Jesus to get forgiveness. And if I don't get forgiveness, I could end up in hell. So sex is a deadly sin. And let me repeat that. In the minds of most Christians, from very early on in their training, from the time you were a baby practically, sex is thought of as a deadly sin. It's one of the surest ways to go straight to hell. If you don't believe me, ask a few evangelicals about gays. Are the gays going to hell? Of course they are. Sex is the quickest way. Is premarital sex? Is abortion? Is anybody had abortion going to hell? You'll get a lot of people tell you, yes, they are. Because that's the way they think. What happened? Okay. So sex can send you to hell. And what happens is it sets us up for an impossible standard. Human beings cannot possibly not have sex. It's the rare person on this planet, besides my Sunday school teacher and the priest that's in your church. Nobody else ever has sex. So it does something to us when we're created or taught about sex and sexuality that I call the guilt cycle. This is a simple psychological concept. I actually had never seen this explained in this way before. I was writing my book, The God Virus, and this idea kind of came together. I mean, you'll think, well, sure, I knew this all along, but nobody's ever talked about it in this way. I want to explain to you how this works. Your mom says, don't get in the cookie jar before supper. Well, you're hungry and the cookies sure look good, so you put your hand in there and you get a cookie and you eat it. What's your mom do? You shouldn't put your cookie in the cookie jar, slaps your hand, scolds you or whatever. The rule is you don't eat a cookie. So now you know what the rule is. But you have this cycle of tension, behavior. Now the next time you see a cookie and you're hungry, you're going to want to grab that cookie, but you're going to have second thoughts. And that second thoughts can be thought of as guilt or maybe even shame. So what it does is it creates a cycle that you're taught when you're very, very young. From the very day you're able to interact with parents in a disciplinary way, you're being taught the cycle of guilt and shame. And I'll tell you this. You may think, Darrel, you're crazy. It's not from the day you're born. But I remember my grandmother changing my little brother's diapers. Now, I'm 5 years old, and he's only 6 months old. And my little brother's getting his diapers changed. And my little brother, reaches down and touches his penis while she's changing his diapers. And she slaps his hand away. Just slaps his hand away violently. And I saw that. I'm a 5-year-old witnessing this, and I'm telling you as if I saw it yesterday. That is a sexual lesson from my very uptight, very sexually repressed grandmother who had a child out of wedlock and got divorced and never admitted it till her dying day. And we just found out all sorts of shit about my grandmother. My ex-wife is doing some research on my daughter's family, and she's come up with all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, my grandmother never married her second husband. There's no evidence of any being married. So my grandmother, who was so sexually uptight, spent an entire lifetime lying about her life, lying about her second marriage, lying about the birth of my father. I mean, my dad was an only child. So there was lots and lots of crazy shit going on in that house. And it's all because she was a fundamentalist Christian. And my grandfather, the only man I knew as my grandfather, was a country church preacher for 45 years. So for 45 years, as a preacher, he was living a lie. So here's the way the whole guilt cycle says. You should do as God commands. If you break the commandment, you disappoint God, and you feel guilty about it, you ask for forgiveness, don't do it again, you go back to church, you read your Bible, you go to confession, whatever you have to do, and then the process starts all over again. So what religion does is it teaches you it gives you the disease, then it says, oh, yeah, we can help you cure that disease. So the way it works is, did I get here it is. This is the way it works. Our former circle, we just keep that, but then there's a little bypass out there. Well, once you feel guilty, you can always go to the priest and confess your sins. And once you confess your sins, I feel relief. I'm no longer going to go to hell, at least not until I masturbate again or have sex with my boyfriend again or whatever. So then you go through the cycle over and over again. Now, the beautiful thing, and this is an amazing psychological tool. The beautiful thing about the psychological tool is the more you use it, the more it infects you with the God virus. Every time you go back, you have to get forgiveness. That means you got to talk to Jesus. You got to talk to the priest. You got to read your Bible. You got to go to Sunday school. You got to do something to get forgiveness. Now, have any of you ever heard of a Catholic going to a Baptist minister to confess their sins? Ever heard of that? How about a Muslim going to a Catholic priest to confess their sins? It's ludicrous, isn't it? You were laughing at me. Yeah, it sounds ludicrous, and yet, why they're Christian, why don't they go confess their sins to a Baptist minister if you're a Catholic? Or whatever. And the reason is, you can only get relief in the place you learn the guilt. The church teaches you the guilt, gives you the disease, and then they say, we are the only cure for that disease. Only Baptists can cure Baptist guilt. Only Nazarenes can cure Nazarene guilt. And only Catholics can cure Catholic guilt, and Muslims, Muslim guilt, and Hindus, Hindu guilt. It doesn't matter. They all use shame and they all use guilt. And only the church, the place that you learned it, can possibly help you get rid of it. So it gives you the disease, then it offers you the cure. It's a perfect trap. What it does is it creates an internal policeman. Now, interesting thing there's a difference between shame and guilt. Shame is communal. Oh, I never want my mother to find out I masturbated. That would be shame if she found that out. Guilt is when I masturbated today and I feel bad about it because Jesus watched me. Or I feel guilty because my religion says I shouldn't be doing that. So there's a difference here. I'm not saying they don't overlap, but guilt and shame are oftentimes confused. And I think it's important for us to be careful about using those words a little bit because the treatment for these two is very different. Guilt is something that's individual. Shame is something that's communal. You really can't have shame if you don't have a community. Many people, when they leave religion, still feel guilty, and they may still feel shame, but the shame usually goes away pretty quick. It's the guilt that sticks around, because the guilt was embedded. Why does that keep going out of? The guilt's what gets embedded in the brain. So Christianity imposes what I call an asexual standard. Now, when I say the word asexual, I don't mean it in the term of, pansexual and bisexual, all that. I mean a non-sexual. I don't have another word for it. But what Christianity does is it says no sex is the best person. I mean, that's what Paul said. He said better to marry than to burn, but better to not have sex at all. Basically was what Paul was saying, who I think was probably gay. So Jesus said divorce and remarriage is adultery. Well, that's definitely around bad sex. Don't be doing that. Paul said not to marry. Tertullian. I don't know if anybody's read that jerk. Everybody read Tertullian? God, if you read all of him, my hat's off to you. I can't stand the guy. If you want to read a manual for misogyny, that would be the place to start. And this guy, to this day, is revered as almost the founding theologian of the Catholic doctrine, Tertullian. This guy was so nasty. And he was married. He wasn't even a priest or a bishop. He was just a Christian theologian. Can't imagine how would you be married to somebody who thought not you were second class, but you were not even above the animals if you were a woman, and that you should be punished severely for the rest of your life just because you were related to that woman Eve. He was very adamant that women are the best pavement to hell. So here's some other things that we see in Christianity. Jesus was a virgin. That's a pretty darn interesting biological idea. Born of a virgin. We'll come back to that when we find out whether he masturbated or not. So if you're born of a virgin, what's that mean? It means you had no sex, or you're raped by a god. I don't know which. But they like to pretend like you had no sex, because Christianity believes the ultimate is asexuality, in no sex at all. And again, I want to reinforce: if you're a person who identifies as asexual, go for it. But that's not what the Christian church is doing. The Christian church is trying to impose asexuality on all of its members, and saying the highest form of Christianity is asexual. That's a little different. You being an asexual, you identifying as asexual, great, go for it. But being told you have to be asexual, that's a whole different story here. Many of the saints were asexuals. Many of the saints became celibate. St. Augustine, bless his little heart, probably had sex with 100, 200 women. And then he got Jesus. And then he said, nobody else can do that. But anybody know anybody else like that? Yeah. How many? Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich probably had sex with hundreds of women. Yeah, he finally married his fourth wife, a Catholic woman, and now that's wrong. And nobody else should be able to do it. And we're going to legislate against that kind of behavior. And the guy that runs I don't even call him president anything. I just call him asshole, number 45, in the White House. So look what happened. He got religion when he got in the White House. And you don't think that guy has had sex with hundreds of people. And I don't care if you've had sex with hundreds of people, great, go for it. But don't condemn other people once you get Jesus for having done that. That's what St. Augustine did. And we see other things. We see shame of women. That's like the most important thing that comes out of all of most religions, all patriarchal religions. I do make exceptions for the pagans and the Wicca, and of course the Unitarians. I thought that was a good joke. I'm going to steal that one. You were here earlier for. Thank you. Okay, well, Hitch, I love. Okay, good for Hitch. But what this does is it ensures women are the most infected religious in any religion, because they are in charge of the progeny. They're in charge of the children. So you definitely need to make sure the women have the most shame and the most guilt, so they'll teach that shame and that guilt to their children. That's the way religions propagate. It's not the fathers, generally, they're propagating it in the same way that the mothers can do it. Shame, and they will be shamed if they don't infect their children. And the reason I say that, and it's really kind of interesting, I know atheists that take their kids to church. Now, what is that all about? Why would you, if you're an atheist, take your kids to church? Because I'm ashamed. My parents saying I'm not raising my kid with proper values. So I'm taking them to a Sunday school so they can learn proper values. Like, you can't teach them yourself. And that's exactly what I see. Lifelong atheists feeling shame. And it's almost always the mother that feels the shame. She feels the pressure from her mother and her mother-in-law. She's got two people looking at her saying, you're a bad mother because you're not taking your kids to Sunday school. It's really serious. I see too much of this in the secular world, by the way. So, Jesus, let's get back to masturbation, my favorite subject. Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Notice women can look all they want. I don't know any prohibition in the Bible against women masturbating. Damn it, you ladies, you get away with a lot more than we can. We're going to hell for that, but I don't see anything in the Bible that says we are. So, nothing in the Bible about women masturbating, but there is a lot about prohibition and all other things. There's the prohibition of our friend Onan the Barbarian. I didn't leave a C off of there. Onan the Barbarian had the audacity to decide not to have sex with his dead brother's wife. Now, if I had a dead brother's wife, it wouldn't even cross my mind to want to have sex with her. But because he didn't obey God's commandment, God struck him dead. What he did was he had sex with her and then pulled out the last second and dropped his seed on the ground. And that's where we get the entire prohibition about masturbation in the Bible. And I submit that is not about masturbation. It's about fucking your dead brother's wife. It's really clear if you read that part of the Bible. So isn't it interesting that the entire creator of the universe is sitting there being concerned about you masturbating? So here's the question you came here to hear today. Did Jesus masturbate? Just think in your head. I want you to come up with your answer, because in the end you'll find out what the right answer is, and you can test yourself, see if you're very good at this. So there's 4 different possible answers. First of all, he never existed, which in case he never masturbated, obviously. Second, as he was conceived by way of parthenogenesis, we'll get back to that. He was biologically male, but he was asexual, so he didn't have any sex interests or drives, at least not in the sense of wanting to have sex with someone else. And or number 4, he was biologically male and he was sexual, therefore. So let's start with door number 1. And I love my friend. Door number 1 here is I love my friend David Fitzgerald. He was just out to speak at Oasis 2 weeks ago in Kansas City. Has a good talk about some stuff. Anyway, his mything in action. I don't really believe the guy ever existed, but I'm not going to get into the argument. Bart Ehrman, Dave, all those people. But if he didn't exist, then he couldn't have masturbated. So case closed there, depending on how you look at it. Second is parthenogenesis. And I think this is the most interesting. And I have this up because there's this guy on YouTube who did a whole video upon the virgin birth and what's that mean. And I'm not going to go into the biology of it, but there's really kind of like 4 different kinds of parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis basically means birth without having fertilized an egg. Let's just keep it simple at that. And there's 4 different ways for that to happen. It's the higher you get in terms of the mammalian world, the harder it is. It's never been seen in humans. It has been seen in rabbits, but it was artificially induced. We see it in lizards a lot. In fact, the very kind of parthenogenesis that appears to have happened in the New Testament with Mary and all and the Holy Ghost appears to be the kind that lizards do. So if Jesus was born through a parthenogenetic virgin birth, it meant he was a lizard. That's a distinct possibility, only if it happened in that by the way parthenogenesis. So he and he was a female too, because in this particular way you can only be a female lizard. You can't be a male lizard. Now there are other kinds that can have males come out of them, but this particular way you can't. So just a little biological education. If you're a biologist here and I've screwed this up, then see me later. Don't embarrass me in front of everybody. I'm a psychologist after all. So there. Why in the hell is he telling us what to do with our genitalia if he was asexual? That would door number 3. If he was asexual, then he didn't particularly have an interest in having sex with other people. Now, I know asexual people who still masturbate, and they're happy with their masturbatory life, which is great. So even if he was asexual, still they have masturbated. That's a possibility. And the last one was biologically, he was a male with male hormones. Therefore, he masturbated, and he did it perfectly. Am I not correct? I would think I can't be wrong on that one, our friend. So, let's talk a bit about masturbation in the technical sense, and I'm going to give you guys in here, mostly the people who own a penis. Ladies, you can listen in if you want, but this is just for them for right now. Male masturbation keeps the pipes clean. For us who own a set of testicles and a penis, we create sperm. And sperm are only good for about 5 days. After that, they get senile. Now, that's the word they actually use. It's not because I'm old, it's because my sperm are senile. After 5 days, you don't want to risk it. You need to get rid of those guys and replenish the supply. So it's important for us as males to masturbate to keep the pipes clean and the inventory fresh. For females, it keeps the sexual response healthy. There's a lot of evidence that females who masturbate regularly, if you don't believe me, go on my Facebook page, if you're one of my friends, and look at that latest video I put up of 2 women talking about masturbation. Really interesting. A woman, a professional woman that teaches women how to masturbate. She and I agree totally. Women who masturbate generally have better sex lives because they know their own body. I've been a psychologist for 40 years. I've had people come in, women come in to me and say, I just can't have an orgasm. And I say, well, can you give yourself an orgasm? Well, no, I couldn't do that. Well, why not? It's wrong. Women don't masturbate. Where'd you learn that? From Sunday school or from my mother or from my granny who was very religious or whatever. Well, if we just get you to help yourself have an orgasm, I'll bet you could teach your husband how to give you orgasm. And because how can you expect this poor guy over here to give you an orgasm if you can't do it yourself? Of course, they've never heard of that argument before, and some of them decide to give it a try. Well, both masturbations for male-type people and female-type people release stress hormones and promote sleep, for example. There's a lot of evidence that the more an organism masturbates, the fresher their sperm are. So there's an evolutionary advantage to us who own penises because we get the fresh sperm in there. Now, if you want to know more about why I'm saying that, go watch my talk. It's on YouTube on sexy evolution and what the penis is all about. It's not what you think it is. There's some duck porn in that one too, by the way. Some of you may have. How many of you have seen my duck porn talk? Okay. Only one person. We should have me do the duck porn talk today. Okay, well, anyway, moving right along. Female masturbation, of course, helps you go to sleep. And I love this meme that just went up recently. You pray? No, I masturbate. I don't know how many women have told me that that's better than the sleeping pill. But first of all, you gotta be able to let yourself do it. So bringing all this back to religion, let's ask the question, what kind of sex does the Pope want you to have? Papal sex. Think about this. The Pope wants you to have sex like my dog has sex. My dog has sex only when she's in heat. Now, she's 6. I'm a responsible pet owner. But here's the way my beautiful dog, her name was Sugar. She passed away recently. 15 years old, great dog. But Sugar only has sex when she's fertile. In fact, almost every sexual species on the planet only has sex when it's fertile. There are about 5 species that have sex like us, whenever the hell we want to. There's only about 5 of those species on the planet. And the Pope says, well, no, you can't masturbate, you can't have sex outside of marriage, and you certainly can't have sex except for procreation. And that's the papal approach. So if you think about it, if you're a Catholic, the Pope wants you to have sex like my dog has sex. Animal sex. We are humans. We can have sex whenever we want. We can masturbate whenever we want. Please don't start now, but just keep it to yourself. But you can see that the Pope doesn't have any understanding of our biology. The whole notion of virgin birth, crazy notion that leads to being a lizard if you're Jesus and stuff like that. So I'm going to ask you to think about this. How does this all apply to you? So let me stop before I move. I gave you all the evidence here. So my question, I want you to do a poll here. How many of you think Jesus masturbated? Oh, okay. There you go. Almost not 10%. I have convinced you, right? I don't know what I convinced you of, but anyway. So for 2,000 years, Christianity has perverted our sexuality. It's persecuted us for our sexuality. It's distorted our sexuality. And it's time for us to take back our sexuality. That's what I want to talk to you about here today. Today, in this culture right here in Madison, Wisconsin, we are swimming in a polluted stream. Now, a fish in a polluted stream probably doesn't know they're swimming in a polluted stream. So the pollution is coming in and getting into the body, and they don't even know it. If you're a secular person, if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you're still in this culture, and you still may feel some shame about who you are and what you are, about your body image, about the way your desires around sex. So if you experience any of that shame or guilt, you probably are still infected with religious ideas. And my challenge to you today, psychologically, is for you to dig down a little bit and find out if any of those pieces apply to you. Are you still... I have a friend, he's at my age. He cannot perform cunnilingus on his wife. I asked him why, because when I was 14 years old, my mother taught me how dirty that was and never to do it. Well, that's interesting. He's old as I am. He's been an atheist since he was 14 or 15 years old. He still cannot perform one of the most joyful things, wonderful things. So his wife has to have alternatives. Let's just put it that way. So we act like Christians when we hide our sexuality. We pretend that we don't or didn't do something like have premarital sex, or we hide the number of sex partners we've had before we got married. We let religionists condemn and perfectly legal kinds of sexuality, normal sexuality. We let religions shame us. We act ashamed or we shame others for their sexuality. I see secular people shaming women and men on how they dress when it has nothing to do with them. It's not even their business. So we act like Christians when we act like we don't use pornography. Folks, I got some news for you. Ain't hardly a person on this planet that hasn't seen pornography. And most of those persons have used it in some way. When people say use pornography, they really mean I masturbated to it. Let's just be really clear about what's going on here. And there's a reason why the hockey puck, that's not a climate change thing, that's a porn thing. The hockey puck has gone up so high, it's become accessible. And if you just look at there's a really good book on the history of sex, the art in sex. It's 3 volumes. I'm only halfway through the 2nd volume. Great book. If you want to know about it, I'll have to get the precise title. What this guy shows in this book is there's pornography going back about 25,000 years. Pornography is not new to our culture. It's just the quality has improved a bit over the little tiny statuettes of very busty statues of women. And we do, but that was the porn of the day. There's drawings in caves and stuff that appear to be somewhat pornographic. So porn's been around a whole lot. This particular picture was interesting. I stopped at the porn shop and asked the gal that owned the porn shop about, well, what about that big sign right above your porn shop? And she said, oh yeah, isn't that great? Said, why is it great? Our business took off the minute they put that sign up there. Our little sign's not nearly big enough. How many Christians do you think went into that porn shop? I don't know. So I'm going to give you a little way to look at this, and then we can help understand how it applies directly to you. You remember that old Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a redneck if? Well, I'm going to change that a little bit, especially if you're secular. You might be a Christian, you might be a Muslim, a Hindu, a Mormon, if you feel guilty about masturbating. You might be one of those if you feel shame about enjoying pornography. You might be one of those if you have difficulty talking to your children about sex and sexuality. Why are we so reticent to talk to our kids and educate them in proper, age-appropriate sex and sexuality? It comes from religion. There are cultures on this planet where kids are properly educated about their sexuality very early on. I write about that extensively in my book, Sex and God. You might be a Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or Mormon if you have difficulty talking to your spouse or partner about sexual fantasies you would like to try. Now, let me be really clear here. I'm not saying your partner has to participate in those sexual fantasies. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you can't even talk about it, something's wrong there. You must feel shame, or you're afraid you will be shamed by your partner. Those are things to examine. Let's get that box open, that Pandora's box open, and let's look at why we feel shame about those kinds of things. And that's half the job of a sex therapist, is to help you get comfortable talking to your partner about what you like and what you don't like. That woman who can't even masturbate herself can't very well talk openly to her partner. So, you might be one of those if you feel disgust around normal sexual activities. You might be one of those if you shame others, especially shaming women. And finally, when you put all that together, what we realize is that sex is the weak spot of religion. What if you took all the shame and took all the sex out of religion? What would you have left? What would you do with a Catholic if they didn't have any sexual guilt? I mean, they wouldn't be a Catholic, would they? I have been to swinger parties and BDSM parties before. I'm shocked at how many Baptists there are. There are Baptists, I mean cross-wearing Baptists at those kind of parties. And I ask them, man, the cognitive dissonance is amazing. Just amazing. They're in church the next Sunday maybe, but I'm serious. This is, as a psychologist, just fascinates me. How can you be beating somebody's butt one day and go to church the next day and claim that sex is going to send you straight to hell? But anyway, that's a whole nother talk. I think we should follow the gay community. I think they have paved the way for the rest of us. And as secularists, we need to recognize that we should be proud of our sexuality, just like many of my gay friends are. The whole LGBTQ movement has paved the way for a lot of new things that we are benefiting from. If you don't identify with any of the LGBTQ categories or something else, fine, but you're probably still benefiting. There are laws being passed, there are taboos and mores that are being broken down, and we owe a debt of gratitude then. I think we need to be out about our sexuality, and we need to respect and support other people's sexuality as well. That people have a right to their sexuality, and we should not be trying to impose it unless it's non-consensual and unage appropriate, for example, child molestation and that sort of stuff. So I think we should start responding to people who come up to us to ask us about our sexuality. And I think something like, sure, I fornicate, just like a lot of Christians do. Sure, I masturbate. Don't you? Who's the weird one around here? David Fitzgerald brought me into San Francisco. I was coming through San Francisco. I stopped and talked to him and stayed with him a day or two. And he invited me to go to a Christian leadership seminar. Now, why would they ever want me in there? I couldn't figure that one out. But I went out of loyalty to David. And I'm the speaker. And it's a bunch of high school and early college kids with 4 adult males in the back supervising. And they're sleeping in this church for a week's time. Think about that. Teenagers sleeping in a church for a week's time. You don't know how many people have told me in my career that they lost their virginity in a church. It happens. It happens. So I stand up there. The first thing I say, of course, is, how many of you masturbate? I masturbate. And Dave and I raise our hands. And none of these 18, 19, 20-year-olds raise their hands. How is that possible? So it just shows us how much they have to lie about their bodies, about their sexuality to be a Christian, and starting at a very early age. So, sure, I enjoy pornography, just like most religious people. If you look at the statistics, the more religious a community is, the higher its porn rate, period. And that goes back 20 years. We know this is not even in doubt in any way, shape, or form. Sure, I had premarital sex. Didn't you? You're missing out. And by the way, most Christians have premarital sex. There's a lot of evidence that most people who go to church every Sunday have sex before they got married. Sure, my sister had an abortion, and I support her in that decision. Or, sure, I had an abortion. You got a problem with that? It's my body. Those are things you can say, and don't let them shame you. I see so much shame coming down around abortion from the evangelicals and the Catholics to the seculars. We don't have to put up with that shit. This is us. And they don't have a right to tell us what we can and can't do with our bodies. So, I think we should frame their behavior. This is an important piece here. And I think if you leave here, think about this. How can you frame their behavior when the subject comes up or when you're talking to somebody about this? Because control of women's body is the central ingredient of patriarchal religions. Every patriarchal religion has to control women and control women's bodies. So we need to challenge their frame. And you might, if you're a woman, you might say, I use birth control because I like sex inside or outside of marriage, just like Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh or Donald Trump. These people all are passing legislation that is trying to restrict your sexual opportunities, your sexual legal rights, and yet every one of these people are like the poster children for absolutely horrendous, misogynistic sexual behavior and practices. So here's some other lines of inquiry. Does your minister or priest masturbate? I was at a conference just like this at Kansas University a few years ago and had a debate between Dan Barker. Anybody know Dan Barker here? And a guy named Eugene, I don't remember his last name, one of the big mega church ministers there in the Lawrence Peak area. And Dan had just done a great job of tearing this guy up to show how many lies there were in the Bible. And at the end of the debate, I noticed, well, Dan didn't say anything about sex. So I got up at the microphone first. I was right at the very first microphone. And I said to Eugene, hey, Eugene, I masturbate. Do you masturbate? A whole lot of his church members were there that day. That was interesting. Anyway, he said, I plead the Fifth Amendment. Literally, I've got this on film. He said, I plead the Fifth Amendment. Now, he's like a 35, 36-year-old virile guy, and he's married. You know, the guy jacks off once in a while, at least. And he couldn't admit it. I turned to the audience. I say, how many of you masturbate? And, of course, all the Secular Student Alliance people raise their hand. It's like a virtual masturbating society there, it looked like. But all the people on the other side of the room were from his church. None of them raised their hands. Is that possible? No, it's not possible. You have to live a lie. Remember my grandmother living 82 years and dying with her lie. And it definitely affected her life and affected a lot of other people's lives in the way she treated other people, in the way she felt about herself in her marriage. So I am not a Christian. You haven't figured that one out yet. And I don't feel like I really need to act like one. So to close off my talk here today, I just want to let you know I am not a Christian, and I don't have to act like one. So let's get out here and be a secular sexual. So I would like to suggest that you start using that term, secular sexual. I'm not a Catholic sexual. I'm not a Baptist sexual. I'm not a Muslim sexual. I am a secular sexual. And as a secular sexual, I have a certain set of beliefs, guidelines. I have a certain set of ethics. And that's the most important one. I have got some ethics. And I've got ethics you Catholics don't even know about, or you Baptists don't know about. So like things like consensual sex. We see the child rape issue is coming up so big in the Baptist church right now. Believe me, it's in every other Protestant church. Catholics just led the way, but it is everywhere. Okay, thank you.